think we're going to get started. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Jody Slippy, Professor of English, Director of Writing Workshop, and Coordinator of Writing. I want to thank the Principal Financial Group Center for Global Citizenship for sponsoring this, as well as the Humanities Center. I'm particularly pleased and a little ashamed at the same time that Diego Zavala is with us, considering the circumstances happening locally on our campus and at the same time in our country. But Diego was supposed to be here in October. But he has his own embarrassments that are a little different. 3 hours before he was supposed to arrive, take a plane to Mexico City to start his venture to the United States, his path to immigration, so to speak. Somebody stole his passport. And he couldn't come. That was in October. So we frantically tried to rearrange things, reschedule things, make sure that the teachers, Dina Smith and Laura Garcia, it was very difficult with their schedules, but they had these days available. And we were able to schedule for Diego to come and spend a week with us. He worked hard to get his passport expedited during that time, and lo and behold, his faith in humanity was restored. Somewhere in Guadalajara, a city of 6 million people, in a district he had never visited before, correct?
That's correct.
A woman found his passport. Now, I attribute this that in some countries, like Mexico, there are miracles. True miracles. And so, because of that, we are lucky that he's here today, and he's been helping me get through some of the things that we're going through here when it comes to our relationships of difference. Let me tell you a little bit about Diego Zavala. For the last 5 years, going on 6 now, he has been a key contributor to the partnership between Drake University and Technological de Monterrey. And in fact, I've had the pleasure of working with him in 6 years on research projects, on teaching projects, on helping to develop part of the partnership. So it's very important that we continue this work, and Diego has made a significant contribution to it. He is presently in the Department of Digital and Media Arts at Technological de Monterrey, Guadalajara campus. And he's a member of the National Research System of the National Science and Technology Council of Mexico, a prestigious position to have. At Monterrey Tech, he teaches courses in film studies, screenwriting, TV, and film production. He has also taught similar courses when he has held the role of visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and at the University of San Diego. He's published widely in academic journals, essay collections, and media publications with special attention to Mexican cinema, documentary theory, and most recently, the relationship between interactive documentary and social activism. His scholarship on the social functions of interactive documentary has been concerned with how economic conditions and technological developments have created pressures and possibilities conducive to social groups to employ us and use new forms of digital technology to make their concerns and narratives more visible for policymakers, stakeholders, and institutions, and thereby become more active contributors to discussion and debate in the public sphere. This scholarship is connected to the most recent production of digital media, which has been supported by Tech and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. I was fortunate this summer to observe and work with him in the museum's media lab, researching, writing, and producing an interactive documentary about food and climate change that incorporated footage of works included in the museum's permanent collection. This is just one example of how Diego integrates his critical and creative abilities, a talent that I genuinely admire. His talk for this evening is the resurgence of collaborative documentary in the internet era, communities, technologies, and social narratives. His concern with the possibilities for traditional and interactive documentaries to contribute through partnerships with institutions and grassroots organizations in efforts to promote progressive social change. I think I emphasize the matter of partnerships between tech and Drake, and in the work that Diego is doing, because in the time we're living in now, I think partnerships and communication and understanding others is essential, because it's the work we claim we do, and it seems like we have a lot more work to do. So to continue that work, it is a genuine pleasure for me, and I hope you'll join me to welcome my friend and collaborator, Diego Zavala.
It's a pleasure to be here once again. Thanks to Jody, who always makes a beautiful presentation. And I'm always a little bit shy every single time I need to speak to the public after that. I'm really happy I found my passport, and that allowed me to be here with you and share some of the thoughts and the work I've been doing and developing together. This is my third time at Drake. I've been here in 2012, 14, and this is the third time I have the chance to visit you, and it always has been, I would say, one of the most significant relationships in professional and personal terms for me. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you and share these thoughts. The presentation I'm going to go through a little bit is about a little bit of the context and tradition of documentary films in the 1960s, to try to give a framework in terms of what means making this expansion or this transition to documentary in the internet, or what we call as web documentaries and interactive documentaries. I'll try to make a distinction a little bit later about what does it mean to speak about in terms of web documentary or interactive documentary, especially for the new media, and trying to clarify ideas in terms of being specific about the body of work we're doing. The title I chose was The Resurgence of Collaborative Documentary in the Internet Era, Communities, New Technologies, and Social Narrative. For a couple of years now, I've been working specifically analyzing interactive documentary, but at the same time, I've been trying to incorporate the production of interactive documentary in my documentary film production class. But it's not like an easy task in terms of getting the students to build this project, since they need competencies some of them don't have, that it's mainly coding. So that means that we have a new technological frontier in terms of not only knowing about documentary tradition, art, style, but also about informatics. So this little gap sometimes makes it hard for us to actually develop the projects in terms of having the web pages functional. And what I try to do is a little bit of a mixture between these interactive projects and going through classic documentary film. I've chose a different approach, not the classical one maybe, not going through history of documentary in my classes, but more hands-on approach. And I've been using collaborative methodologies to work with my students. And this means that we are doing mainly intervention in communities, working for 2 or 3 months, and then having workshops with them for the people to learn how to use the camera, the microphone, and the editing software, so they can actually do the production, and we are just there to guide them or to help them. That's what we call technological transference in the tradition of documentary film. And this is what we've been doing. A little bit in terms of a pedagogical approach is better. because it allows the students to teach other people what they know. And in this effort to try to understand the needs of people, what they are doing is actually explaining to themselves why they know these things and how they do it. So it's a way of a reflection about their own practice and trying to share their knowledge with other people. Giving a little bit of theoretical framework, maybe two of the main papers or books that have been around since a few years that are like a reference for speaking about new media, but in terms specifically of participatory culture is the book that Henry Jenkins did for the MacArthur Foundation in 2009 that is called Confronting the Challenges of Participatory Culture, where he actually addresses one of the main problems in third world countries, mainly that it's the digital gap. That means that just half of the population in Mexico, for example, has access to internet. The rest don't have a smartphone or a tablet or internet at home. So that means that we have half of our population marginalized without having access to those contents. The other book that is a little bit brighter, maybe, it's Inventing the Medium, Principles of Interaction Design as a Cultural Practice. This is maybe one of the most renowned academics related to new media. She's Janet Murray. She actually coined the concept of digital humanities while she was working at the MIT. Now she's at Georgia Tech and she has an interactive television lab. Usually what she does is applications for second screen for television. She has worked with CNN, ESPN, MSNBC, everybody. Just the specific extract I need to work through the presentation is that she says that this new media has 4 affordances. One is that it has a spatial component, the other that it works through processes, specifically through coding, that it has encyclopedic affordance, and finally, the one that I chose as the main concept for this presentation, that it allows participation. The others are connected to the examples that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to try to explain a little bit how they are evolving, a little bit of making like history and trying to have a period of time, like a framework, to know when this kind of production started and how it is evolving for the future. But first, a little bit of context in terms of film history, that it's the participatory tradition in film, and maybe some of the people here at the room would remember that this comes from an anthropological approach. It's an anthropological methodology that it's used to make agency, or at least to participate while observing people in a specific community, especially communities that are not the original community of the anthropologists. In the first period of the anthropological shift after the Second World War, it was going outside to meet the other. Then it would turn back in the 60s and the 70s, and the anthropologists began to film themselves and record their own communities in order to explore and reflect what's happening in their own cities and societies. I did a brief timeline for 3 regions or 3 countries that could help us a little bit, like have like a comparative approach. The first one would be the US timeline. I'm going to speak a little bit of Canada and then move on to Latin America to try to give a broad perspective of how this has been going. Maybe the first example that we have in the United States, it's 1966, what we call the Navajo movies, filmed by John Adair. All this material, or all the archive that Adair produced, is at the Pennsylvania University Archives, so it's available for you to go and watch it and read it. There's a lot of notes, books, and papers related to this. But this derived later in the American Film Institute to make what they call the Community Film Workshops in 1972. One of the most important ones was the Anthropology Film Center in Santa Fe, even though there were like 6 or 7 of these workshops running around the country. Chicago was another place, Berkeley. And finally, the production began nationwide, and the first series that was made for TV was The Indian Country Today. That was one of the first contents related to Native Americans. There's, I would say, one of the famous chapters is when Marlon Brando was part of the show. And this was a little bit of the push or the pressure to get PBS through public policy to begin to make contents nationwide about the natives in the United States. So then we have the Native American series that started in 1974 at NBC TV. This is one small fragment of John Adair's and Sol Worth working in 1966. Oh, it's not going to be here. Yeah, it is. It's a silent film, but what he did was taking 60mm cameras, cord cameras, to the communities and teach them how to use it, how to load the magazine, and how to edit. As you could see, we are working already with small cameras, the type of cameras that became popular after 1960 with direct cinema and cinema verite. Usually they had like 2 or 3 minutes of film in each load to work with, but it was more than enough. And then they taught them to make the editing part in the editing room or table. That it's this, maybe for the film studies people, this is like something fairly common, but for the rest, maybe this used to be the process to do instead of going to a software and putting the fragments and then put them together. So you needed to make the linear structure through the film, cut the film, put some tape, put the 2 parts together, and then go on and on and on and on. And you had a little monitor right here, and it was fairly mechanical and manual process. And rhythm and structure were something that was far more abstract than now. You needed to have all the information in your mind of what were you going to do in terms to put it in the material you were working with. So this process that started first in the United States and moved to other countries, it's part like of a trend in the 60s that then it will be transformed in a second generation near the 80s and the 90s, and finally the one that it's my scope, that it's what happens when the internet comes into the scenario. In the Canadian experience, we have Challenge for Change, that it's also called as the FOG process, that it's maybe the first documentary film that was made with this methodology in Canada. His most known filmmaker is Colin Loaded, is the one that started it. It started in 1967, just a year after the Navajo experience, and it lasted until 1980. But the thing is that Canada was the first one to actually make public policy around it. So it means that they promoted the production of this kind of documentaries, and they were able, this bunch of people, to make 145 English films, or films in English, and almost 60 in French. This process finished, but it's part of the National Film Board tradition that it's maybe one of the most supportive boards for filming in the world. And now, and I can advance this part, National Film Board was the first one to promote the interactive documentary production. So this is one of the avant-garde institutions making a little bit of trends in terms of which methods or ways of filming society we have in the world. And I'm going to put it, it's just, well, this is a promotional for the book that is maybe the best reference for Challenge of Change. Some of the images, It was published, I think it was like 3 years ago. It's weird that if it happened almost 40 years ago, it's the first coherent book that recovers all the information related to this, to the program of Challenge or Change. But actually it's happening in a lot of countries that they don't realize the relevance of this kind of documentaries until they make a little bit of history and go through their material to see what they have done. Same is happening in Mexico and other countries. They are beginning to revisit their archives to see what they've got in their vaults and see if they can make curations, DVD collections, TV series, etc. Some of the images of the, you can see the logo of the National Film Board. And here in the presentation that I can gladly share with you, you have in YouTube the Children of Fall, that it's a movie that opens the tradition in Canada. We still struggle in this time, 1960 mainly, with sound in film, since it was a small celluloid camera, and usually what happened is that they used to put a voiceover or music, a little bit like in the silent films, and then it evolved to a more complex approach in production. And in the last part or phase, in the 80s, it started already to use the first video cameras. The Mexican experience, it's actually not the Mexican experience alone. It's a long tradition of Latin American films coming from the 60s, of some collectives working with film production. One could be Cinepobre or Poor Cinema, related mainly with Brazil, but not exclusively. Glauber Rocha and other of the filmmakers of this time. Cine Labor in Mexico, that it was related to workers in strike in the 1960s. Grupo Camao, that maybe it's the oldest one. It started working in the 60s, early 60s, 62. And they made the first fiction film in Aymara language. So this is the idea of fiction film crossing to actually speak about the reality of the native people. And in Brazil we have maybe a more contemporary approach, that is television of the villages, television nas aldeias, that it's inspired in Paulo Freire's work in pedagogy, translated to media production. We can see a couple of seconds of this. It's also YouTube, so you can see it completely. As you can see, it's really close to the neorealistic tradition we have after the Second World War, related to French films, Italian films, but it also is trying to build a national tradition through incorporating the Aymara language and having non-professional actors between the natives in Bolivia to be part of the film. So this would be like a little bit like the style that Jorge Sanguinés would promote, and it will become very, very common in Latin America, mixing elements of documentary film and fiction film. Laura Rocha would do the same thing. Raimundo Iglesias in Argentina would do the same. And the Mexican filmmakers also. We can speak about Felipe Casals or Arturo Ripstein, for calling just a couple of names. The first transference of technologies in Mexico started with the National Indigenous Institute called INI, and they made approximately 95 films of 160 that were intended related to this transference of media, but they have almost 3,000 cans of film related to possible productions or the register of some elements of the cultural heritage of the people of Mexico. So that means that they have a huge amount of material and footage to work with. The thing is that the catalogs were lost and most of that material, it's filmed, but we don't know what it's for. So a little bit of archaeology of media needs to be done, and a lot of people is working that part. And in the 90s, Zapatista Army reconnects the tradition and starts having workshops for rebels to actually become cameramen, and some of the NGOs and nonprofits from other places like France and Canada started making documentaries that help in a sense to keep the communities safe. So they use the cameras a little bit like a way of confronting the paramilitaries or the militaries in order to tell them that that was going to be a documentary that would be seen around the world to try to prevent the attacks or the raids they had on the towns during the second part of the 90s. This is the first film that actually was made with the transference methodology. It was made in an Ikud community in South Oaxaca. And the filmmaker, she's a woman, Teofila Palafox. She became a professional documentarist. She has made almost 5 documentaries by now. And this was like the first experiment made by the groups that work there. And it's a day in the life of the Ikud family. It's a little bit peaky. This is the trailer for the documentary. I'm going to write my name, read the book. You can see the shadow of the team with the camera and the microphone appearing in a very naive way. You can see the style, and it's handheld camera. Fishermen making the nets called the atarrayas. The average time to make one of these atarrayas is 2 years. So they keep sewing and sewing to try to restore all the little fragments that break every single time they throw it to the water. And then we have the scenes when they are actually fishing on the river. Okay. As you can see also, if this is a trailer, it's more like a slice of life rather than a well-structured composition of material, and this was a little bit the style they used for this kind of documentaries. 4 years ago, the Zapatista Army made the first long feature fiction film related to a theme of the Liberation Army, and it was a love story about 2 insurgents getting in love in the jungle and deciding that they were going down to the town to have a normal life where they would stay, but they had to separate if they stayed at the army. So it's this kind of approaches that are becoming like part of the everyday life of the communities, deciding how to narrate their own stories and build from documentary perspectives or from fiction perspectives. Then we have a second generation that I'm gonna go through this really, really fast to get to the interactive part. that it's what happened when the video technology appeared. So maybe what happened, and maybe this is something some of you know about, this transition to what we call the digital storytelling, that in the 1980s books, even in mid-schools, in high schools, was called video production, plain and simple. It became digital storytelling, and Joe Lambert was one of the first promoters. Started a center in Berkeley, not in the university, but at the town. He has a very interesting book that's like $10 in Amazon, related to what is digital storytelling and how to make a story. And by now, since 1993, they have almost 25,000 videos produced in the style of work. What they usually do is what they call empowering videos. So it's through workshops that they teach the people to make very simple approaches, mainly through photographs. It's like a PowerPoint with a voiceover and maybe a music of the person explaining a difficult part of their lives or a crisis or a deep relationship with somebody that has complex aspects. The focus changes from the community perspective to a more individual approach, even though it's interesting to see that it's a community of videos, 25,000 in the same portal, but everybody's working on their own project. So it's a way of making self-reflection or working on your own autobiographical narrative. Let me open. You know the drill. It's down. You can see that on. At least I can show you the book. So the book is called Digital Storytelling, Happy Lives, Creating Community, Digital Imaging, and Computer Vision. Usually it's a one-week workshop. They moved from Berkeley to Denver, Colorado, and they have been doing this for almost 25 years. It's a very nice portal, and you have great stories when you're blue, and this is one of the things I do as my personal rituals. There are a lot of empowering stories, so you actually feel better every single time you see the story. So, strongly recommended for this somber days. And the transition is very simple. It is how to speak about it in terms of collaboration in times of the internet. And we have this kind of approach. So now I'm getting into the examples related to what we call interactive documentary. This is a film made by a scholar. Her name is Lisa LeBeau. She works in Sussex. She is one of the privileged people in the world that has to teach not one but 2 documentary courses in her school. That's a very weird thing to have. Usually documentary film or documentary analysis or documentary history is just one course in the middle of an undergrad program. There's no time for more, so that means that if you have 2, you're a privileged one. I think we had the link, but we lost it. Let's see if it was working. Yeah. And this is a good one to start with because she speaks about this as a meta-documentary, not even interactive documentary or web documentary. Usually they don't do the distinction, but I think it's a fertile one. When we speak about web documentary, we think about a web page. It's a web-based documentary production. Usually what happens is that it's been fragmented into different videos that you can click, and through the hyperlinks, you have access to the elements, but it's not a narrative. It's more like a puzzle or more like a labyrinth you need to go through. And speaking about interactive documentaries, we can think about these non-fiction experiences that are related also with physical interfaces. So we move a little bit more into the museum or the art center or the Hollywood shows or the parks, the entertainment parks that have this component of documentary or nonfiction showing you videos, found footage, or audiovisual components related with things that interact physically with you. So the light can turn on, or you can walk to a place where you start to hear an audio of something coming. This kind of more haptic approach, not based on the web, but actually interacting in terms of the space. This one is more like an abstract approach, that it's, if you like a more like data visualized approach, it's more like an informational approach. It's more what is happening in the journals, New York Times and other papers that are using this as a way of compressing a lot of information in just one image. So what we have here is a connection, as you can see, of different categories and how they work together. And then here you have the elements. You can work through themes, people, projects, or articles. So if I just click projects, that means, well, this is a documentary about the revolution, the Egyptian spring. So what she did was a collection, like a digital museum, of all the community-based and politically active filmmakers working during that time that wanted to share their content. And she did this like abstract map of all the elements present in this narrative world and put them to work together. So you have here the Shafin.com, we are watching you, that it's related to a person that it's in orange, Sharif El-Katasha. So the thing is that every single dot represents a project with a color and makes the connections to people, to themes, or to articles. Specifically, she includes PDFs so you can read about the context, the history of the movement, and how it's happening. So we go to articles, for example. Next to this place, you can read, for example, the notes on Basma Mortala. It's mainly like a Wikipedia related to the Egyptian revolution, but it's a more condensed material and it's focused on one theme, trying to build a complex narrative, but either way, it's a way of interacting through the web. So this is one of the examples that I think is relevant, and she's a scholar. She writes a lot about documentary, and she writes, I think she has a great narrative. This is one of the projects that has been in the mouth of everybody in the last years. It's a Kipu project. Started through a collaborative approach in short documentary films, documentary videos, and they stumble upon one of the biggest things in Peru right now, that it's the forced sterilization of women and men. Over 300,000 people were sterilized during the Fujimori administration. And this was a taboo thing in Peru, and through constant approaches of people to make stories, finally somebody decided to make the memory about it. So the approach was to build an interface that could hold all the stories, but the problem was how to make the people participate, since they were not very eager to share their stories. And what they decided to do was to make anonymous contributions through cell phone calls. So what they did was to give cell phones to the communities and tell them that if they wanted to share their stories, they could call to a specific number and they would record, as we are doing right now with this presentation, the testimony, and then put it in the web with all the rest. Kipu means this traditional necklace from the Indian culture, and as you can see, it's a web page. You have all the information. You can have a Twitter or a Facebook to get in contact. there's a small paragraph of what it's about, and you can start listening. Sorry, I went through Spanish. I'm used to it, sorry. We can go through English. That's the other thing that is happening. Usually the collaborative approaches are very local-based production, and they are meant to be consumed inside the community, maybe an expansion to the country. But what is happening with this kind of projects?
Se nos ha acusado de que pretendemos, tras una reciente
This kind of projects have the possibility to have a really cheap translation to other languages. It's not running. It's a little bit slow. This is a traditional kipu, that it's some cords that are built into a necklace. And there's a metaphor of how the stories are put together. So this is mainly the interface. You have like a background of video with an audio line of the interview or the call, and you can see some elements appearing down, giving you a minimum information of what is happening. So you can keep the introduction, and by now what I know is that they have almost 15,000 stories related to the forced sterilizations. This is one of my favorites that actually I used it last time I was here. It's a project from the National Film Board in Canada. It's called Here at Home. I'm not going to stop at this one, but I strongly recommend you to look for it. It started as a question for making public policy that was, how do we get the people that are homeless to get their medicines in the case of those that have mental illness? And they started making a social experiment that was in different cities, as you can see, Winnipeg, Montreal, Moncton, and Vancouver, Toronto, to make two communities. One, that they will chase through the streets to try to get them to take the medicines. And the other approach was to give them housing. And the result is amazing in terms of, instead of making healthcare public policy, they ended doing housing policy. Because the numbers of the experiment showed that it was like 85 or 86% easier to get the people to have the meds available if they had a house, instead of if you were chasing them on the streets. So the focus of the documentary goes from how to make the experiment and go from healthcare public policy to make housing policy. This is one of the other classic examples from Latin America. There's a collective of people that is working hard in Chile, and they made this interface that is here, that it's a filmic map. So what they did is, it's a mashup with the Google Maps application, and what they're doing is pinpointing soundscapes, little slices of live videos that people make with their cell phone, and they're putting them in the map. So the idea is to build a geographical approach to what video and sound show us about those spaces in towns, cities, and in the rural area. I think it's really, really interesting. And you can be there for hours just watching and watching. One of the things, as you can see, and we saw with the meta documentary by Lumo, is that some of the projects are becoming encyclopedic in terms of having a lot of information uploaded. The other trend that is happening is the narrative interactive documentary that National Film Board is proposing. And as soon as you get into the web page, you can see a counter telling you how much time they recommend you to be interacting with the story. So that means that they narrow it to 20 or 25 minutes. That is regularly what a 30-minute documentary in TV would be. And you know that that's the time it's going to consume you. Because otherwise you can be there forever, watching and watching videos, binging, and that's another kind of experience. What they're trying to do is to be more focused in the user experience and in the narrative, rather than showing you this huge approach to all the material that is related to one thing. And then we have the other style of collaborations, not through sharing content, but maybe more like using platforms. This could be like the evolution of Story Center or Digital Storytelling Center that is called StoryCorps, that was born in 2003, 10 years later, and the one in Berkeley. And they have done a lot of money as a nonprofit for the project. They have published by now 5 books, and they have around 200,000 stories on the web. They started with a photo booth in New York, and then they started traveling around the country making this kind of stories, and then there's that you could schedule to make a Q&A inside the booth, make a little video, and then in this video, they would make a little animation of it. So the best videos, or the videos they can handle, they make them into animations, and they just put them on the web. So you can, there's a lot of information. It's a huge blog. They speak about public policy, about how important it is to have the memory of the cultures, and their scope or their mission is to become the audiovisual memory of the world. That's the phrase they use. I know it's a catchy phrase and it's not going to be real, but it's a way of trying to share stories, short stories, 3-5 minutes, about the people that live in the United States. So you can see that we have different styles of animation and the characters, and you have a little description of it. You have changing to another kind of style, more like a toon approach in animation. This is an animation. 3 minutes.
As a child, I would climb up on the lumber stack and look over at the white school. Huge school with a band, football team, everything that you could imagine. And on our side, here we were with our 2-room school, outdoor toilets, and 2 teachers. And gradually, as the black population in town began to go down, that left my mother there at school as the principal, the janitor, whatever was needed, she had to do everything. And as long as there was one black child left in town, they had to keep the school open. So 10, 9, 8, mother was there till the last child, the last family was forced out of town. So I remember one day, mother and I got in the old station wagon, because mother had heard that the school was going to be torn down. We went inside the school, we got whatever records we could find, we put them in the back of the station wagon. Then a big bulldozer came and dug a deep hole. And after digging this deep hole, just pushed our beloved school in the hole and covered it up. And it was as though it was never there. Years later, when I was in graduate school and people would talk about urban renewal, I had a particular perspective. To me, urban renewal meant they'll dig a deep hole and push your school, cover it up, and it'll be like the school never existed or you never existed. I'll never forget those days. Even today, this town of Sheridan, Arkansas, is an all-white town. And if you ever have an opportunity to go through that town, drive very slowly.
Very simple, very powerful, very well focused. Some of them are very hard to watch, some of them are very funny to watch, some of them are very cute to watch. You have stories from grandparents interviewing kids. I saw yesterday a kid with Asperger interviewing his mom about what was things that made her afraid in terms of growing him up. Really, really interesting. We have then this one that it's a little bit small for this encyclopedic approaches I showed you. This is a researcher in UC Davis, Robert McKee. Not Robert McKee from the scriptwriting, another Robert McKee, that he's working to make this same story center approach, empowering stories, but of LGBT communities in the agricultural valleys in California. So that means Mexican and Central Americans and South Americans living in the crop fields, lesbian, gays, transvestites, transgender, and the possibility to tell their own story. I'm not going to stop at this one because every single time I try to show these videos, the computer collapses, the interface is not well done, it's Wix and it works not very good. But if you have a time, Sexualidades Campesinas, UC Davis, and it will appear. And in almost 8 months, he was just able to make 3 videos, or get 3 people to actually make a video. So that means also that the theme is something relevant in terms of how much time that people dedicate to this. And one of the American projects that I think is relevant, and this is almost my last example, before the closure, project from 2012 that is called...
Who started this?
That is called Question Bridge. Started as a video installation for a museum, became an interactive documentary, and then transformed into a platform. It's African Americans making question what does it mean to be an African American in the United States. But the possibility is that under each one of the videos, you can upload your own video. By now, after 4 years, they have over 200 discussions going around, and there are more than 3,500 active members discussing the themes in the platform. So this is like a personal platform becoming something relevant for the community, but coming from an artist project. It's not a platform as Facebook or Twitter that it's like a general use, but it was a very specific approach in terms of art, and then moving on to developing a community. The research we're doing in Guadalajara, this is like the last part of the presentation before we open to Q&A. One of the main institutions that is working with collaborative documentary in Latin America is called Docu Peru. They have been doing documentary caravans around Peru for 15 years now. And Jose Zavala is the founder, went to Guadalajara a couple of times now. He was last summer and this summer giving workshops. And there are 3 to 5 groups of people that are implementing, like myself, this collaborative methodologies in classes or for freelance production. So what we are seeing is independent filmmakers starting to make this kind of transfers of technology, helping people that want to learn how to use a camera and a microphone and a computer to make their own stories. And the idea is that these stories are based in the people that make it, because, as Valado says, the team is not going to go to your town and tell their own story. If it happens that they go, maybe it's because there was a crime, or there was a catastrophe, or something really, really bad happened. So this possibility of empowering through the narratives of the people on their own communities is a way of building identity, sharing their everyday life, and working their tradition in terms of what they have from their past lineage and how they develop in terms of communities. And what we did this time, that was this semester actually, early August, is that we worked with a collective of mothers that are looking for their children that disappeared in Guadalajara. We have, after the war on drugs, almost 1,600 people disappeared from the country. We have almost 4,000 people disappeared in Jalisco, that is the state where Guadalajara is. And this collective of mothers had a really bad experience. They approached to a foundation, and the foundation made a proposal for a federal funding to get money to operate when we know almost for sure that maybe half of the cases that were part of the foundation were kidnapped by the military or the police. So that means that they were working with the money of the people that disappeared their kids. And these moms decided to just let go of the foundation and start working independently. And what they say is that they're not going to get any more money from any institution, nonprofit, NGO, government, or federal funding, or international funding, that they are going to make all the money they need to try to look for their kids. So one of our colleagues, that is the journalism teacher, decided that was maybe a good idea, since they are looking for resources or ways of connecting with the people, teach them how to use this technology. So we went with them for a week. They were in the middle of a little bit of a storm because they were looking for the files to be liberated from the authority, and they had not much time to share with us, but they were part of the interviews. And what we did was like an intermediate approach. We did 3 documentaries with them in 1 week, 15 minutes of production, and we scheduled for December to make a workshop to show the mothers how to use the cameras, the microphones, and make their own stories with the software.
Yo busco a Alejandra López, a Marco Antonio Vigines.
It's in Spanish, I'm sorry I don't have subtitles. We just finished this one, like a week and a half ago. They asked for what we call a list pass. So it's the voice goes through all the kids from the mothers of the collective and the ones that are officially part of the Resurgence. We went to all the universities in Guadalajara to make it more representative. And we asked people to appear with a photograph of a disappeared kid. And if they wanted to make the audio of the voice to be integrated in the video. And then we have a little bit of a narrative in terms of showing the risks, because usually people think that people that disappear is because they are criminals. And this is what the authorities telling the people, that they are criminals. But actually what is happening, that this is like a re-victimization of the people, and they're fighting against this part. So some of the lines or dialogues that we use is that, for example, one was kidnapped 2 blocks away from the governor's house where the police is always around. Another one was, it's a mid-school kid that was kidnapped a block away going to the bus stop. So given these examples of regular people being kidnapped or disappeared just because there's the climate of violence is growing, and more in terms of the drug dealers having to fight for the turf in order to control the selling of the drugs. Out of almost 20,000 people disappeared in Jalisco, there are still like 4,000 people missing. And the mothers are presenting this video and the other 2 in a national march that they're going to do last week of November. So the idea of building this kind of stories is to give them some elements to visualize their story and what they're trying to do. This is a hard phrase. They decided to be like their work. It's, we will not receive ashes, because the government is, instead of presenting the corpses, giving boxes with ashes, making very hard the DNA processes to actually know if they are or they are not the kids from this women. If everything goes okay, we're going to be working with 15 moms in a couple of weeks. And the idea is to make this possibility to transfer the technology and help them tell their stories not like we did, that was more like an intuition of what they needed to make the formal presentation in the March and start telling the stories of them if they want to. The process is long. The journalist that has been working with them for 5 years, he has tried to interview 2 of the participants in the collective, and in 5 years he hasn't been able to make a chronicle about their experiences because they don't want to. So it's a little bit tough and coming and going in terms of speaking about something that is so painful for them, but actually they know that in terms of gaining visibility or showing the problem, they need to outspoke and start speaking with the media, go to radio stations, make videos, approach through social media. They have a Facebook page. They try to get as active as they can in terms of communication. So in terms of conclusions, what is happening or what I see is that interactive documentary and this kind of collaborative approaches through the technologies are helping to build new communities through the internet, building groups in other platforms like Facebook or in pages made by the projects. But it's also making available a huge amount of content in order to make other people get involved with this kind of very personal, intimate approach that it's built mainly to help the people through their own lives. And that will be, thank you very much. There's a bunch of examples. I hope there's a bunch of questions or doubts or ideas about this kind of production or methods or things related to this new approach to digital media. So if you have something in mind, please feel free to ask or share.
I wish that I knew about the StoryCorps earlier this semester because I have in that writing class that we visited, I was doing a new thing, a new unit, and where they do a oral anecdote, where they record each other telling a story, and then they had a reading that looked at the structure of oral anecdotes, and then eventually leading to a short story. And the StoryCorps are oral anecdotes that are then reimagined via cartoon. And so it's very similar, and it's just a perfect connection. I wish.
And I will say something, kids love it. My students, every single time I use StoryCorps, they go, wow. And they find things that are close to their emotions, and that they are close to their fears and thoughts. And the other part is that it's very simple storytelling in terms of structure and drama. So they feel that it's feasible in terms of producing it. So it's really, really good. And in Latin America, there's a huge oral history in terms of recovering all the past from our ancestors, and it's becoming real in terms of having these audios that later can become visual stories. So yeah, I think it's a great tool to show people how they engage with their own past and with their own stories. You have everything from LGBT stories, medical stories, United States history, migration, everything. So it's really good. We have a rooster.
That's so weird.
I think it's somebody's cell phone or something.
We took it off like 10, 15 minutes.
It's outside the room.
Didn't hear it the first time. Now I heard it. It's like time to get up.
So I have friends that are working on a project, and I'm interested in this kind of stuff. So I have different, and you Jody knows this, I have a few different websites where I have oral histories, and I make the students do that, and so it's something I'm very much interested in, but also I've been thinking about mapping these stories, and so I'm just wondering about programs like if there's something that is easier to work with in some ways than like GIS, like the arcade, right, like projects, because that's very clumsy in some ways. So I have friends that are working on an indigenous mapping project in LA, and that's a project out of UCLA. And so I'm mapping all, not only like the Tongva people or people who have been there for a long time, but also all the, indigenous Latin American diaspora, right? And it's using that software as, but it's very clumsy in some ways, and I'm just wondering what alternatives there are to mapping that might be
user-friendly. Actually, I presented in the Visible Evidence Conference in Montana this year a paper related to mapping or the use of maps in telling the stories in the interactive documentaries. The thing is that the first thing I would say, and maybe it's not something you would like, I think you need to make an interdisciplinary strategic approach and invite somebody from engineering to code with you. That would be like the best part. That way you can be a little bit like a manager or the executive producer and having somebody actually doing the map for you as organic as you want. If you want options in terms of something that it's easy and you can do, I've seen a lot of projects using Clint that I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a software, there's a license for teachers and students and it's like $250, that's not very expensive. And it's a little bit like After Effects mixed with Adobe Premiere with very intuitive canvas because it makes the connections through arrows in the desk of the software, so you can actually see how the different windows are connected, and you just build the links or the menus to go and make the interface. But it has problems in terms of representation. So for example, if you make an object that is like this size, it could appear in the screen like this size. And you need to put a lock, and it's a little bit like clumsy in the terms you were saying. The other way to do it is, there was a 3W Doc software in France until last year, and then it collapsed. Nobody is using it anymore. There's another one that is a little bit harder, that it's called Corsico, that I'm not very into it because they said it was gonna be free forever. Now you need to pay $50 to get access to it. So they said it was going to be for good and it would be open access, and now it's not. And the other thing would be, I've seen a lot of people using mashups from Google, at least to make like the mashup you want, in order to make like a cinematic approach, and then go with the designer and ask the designer to make the project. I think those are like the viable options. You do have Click, that I think is the one that everybody's using. I've seen projects from Leeds Trinity College in Great Britain using that. I've seen National Film Board projects done. And in Mexico, the 2 web documentaries were made in Clint. So it's like the standard use right now, but I still feel that it's a little bit stiff in terms of putting the objects and the maps to work together. So you can try it out, it's not very hard to learn. There's a 15-day trial for free, and see if it's like pertinent, and then move to the next step that it's paying and they use it.
Diego, I'm not a filmmaker. I study politics
Okay.
here in Madrid, so always from filmmaking. But I'm going abroad in the fall of next year, in the fall of 2017. And I was wondering if you could take a step back from professional filmmaking and look at something that a student could do going into the Latin American community. What type of project would you recommend for a 3-month trip abroad? That's something that would be really rewarding and unique to come back.
Wow, there are a lot of places I would say. I can tell you, Drake has a partnership with Tec de Monterrey, and they are doing a lot of things. For example, I don't know if you've heard of Techo. It's the biggest nonprofit in Latin America right now, and it was one of the 15 biggest nonprofits growing in the world. And what they're doing is building houses. After they make a huge survey and methodology to see where they're going to intervene. But what they do is that they look for a sponsor with a company, Coca-Cola, Nestle, whatever, and they take the workers from the company to help the volunteers build the houses for the people. And the people help to do the houses, and they pay like 50 pesos rent for 3 months in order to make a symbolic act that they are going to take care of the house and they're going to maintain it. They have a big building. I think they have like 5,000 houses built, temporary houses for people living in extreme poverty. And now they are moving more into building furniture, giving them nutrition workshops, helping them to make workshops for the kids, theater, puppets. So they are trying to make a more integrated and well-oriented approach to the communities. So I think Mexico would be one of the options. I've seen a lot of people working this kind of things for any kind of students. No requirements, prior requirements for this kind of approaches in Brazil, but you have the language, that I don't know if that's a problem. But I think it's interesting in terms of watching what's happening right now in Brazil to be there. And if you're looking more for social entrepreneurship and participation in social programs, I would say Madrid. I think that's like, maybe not Latin America, but Madrid is working a lot with city prototyping and new models for social entrepreneurship. Especially, there's a place called Prado Lab, the lab of Prado is the lab in the city, and they are making all the time collaborative methodologies, but of everything. And they open groups of everything, from crochet to having your crops at home, to build a robot to water plants, to make urbanistic approach better, to make bicycling easier in the city. They do a lot of things. And they are publishing all the time. So you can have like a more academic approach, a more hands-on approach, and they work a lot with communities. So I think maybe it was not like the first thing to pop in your mind, but it could be another option.
Thank you. I'm actually headed to Santiago.
You're going to Chile?
Yeah, Chile.
Chile is right now putting public bicycles, and it's becoming a huge moment for mobility and how to express the city. So there are a lot of projects of different neighborhoods trying to get the public bicycles to expand around the city, and I think that could be one of the good projects in terms of civic action and public agency. That's one of the ones that I've seen that is really, really interesting. But if you want, and they're all connected. People from Madrid are working in Chile, people from Chile are working in Brazil, so there's a way of building a little network that if you go to Chile first, maybe in 2 years or so, you can go to other places. So I think there's a good chance to make this kind of things. And always ask, you just get to Chile and ask what the people is doing right now, what is happening. The other is that they won like 2 years ago the possibility to have public schools. That was not part of the public policy in Chile. They had only private schools. So there's possibility of changing from a private model of education to a public model. There should be a huge amount of projects related to that. So that's another way of doing it. Please.
So I can understand this approach of using the internet and web documentaries to reach slightly more technologically advanced populations of people. Like, yes, you can teach a community that doesn't necessarily have technologically advanced cultural implications, but how far does that go? And basically, I guess my question is, isn't there a better approach to get these people's voices heard in the larger scope, or what makes this the best way to do that?
Yes, there are better ways. Maybe, well, this is a huge process of maybe 3 or 4 months working that I tried to make in a very compact approach. The thing is that most of the communities don't have this awareness of the need to tell the stories. They don't spend time telling their stories, or they tell their stories to each other, but they don't make memories or they don't register it in audio or video or photograph. So most of the things, for example, with the diasporic and exiled people, the thing is that you lose the culture that it's based there. So in terms of impact, of course, there are ways of doing it. But first, I think it's like having this approach to make this reflection about what does it mean to make your own stories and to use this technology. And the other thing is that if one community is not interested in the technology, we just disappear. It's trying to build a dialogue between what you're going to show me or teach me and what I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you how to use these tools, but you can teach me, for example, I was learning how to build crops in my house, because that's what they do. They are working with food autonomy. So they are doing crops at home and they're trying to have a green garden in the roof, and they teach the kids how to have these little plants and have something to eat once in a while, or how to take care of animals, things like that. So the other part is that maybe it's not the most potent way to put it, but the thing is, everything that is produced in one of these workshops goes immediately to the internet. That means it's Creative Commons. They can use it, everybody in the community. The idea is that it spreads, and the other is to give them copies of these things. What we have seen in 2 years of approach is one, that people keep calling us to make more videos. So that means that if they have a doubt about how to edit something, they call us, they invite us to their birthday parties, to their prom parties. We went to a baptism of one of the kids that was born during the filmmaking of one of the projects. So you keep contact with the community and you can evolve the needs and see how they are requiring other things from you, or they are giving you other things to you. So this idea of building it, it's more organic rather than in terms of having the impact you're asking for. And the other, it's the urge that people have to show the things. So for example, one of the usual things that you will see in these workshops is, as soon as they finish it, is, oh, it's very well done. Maybe we can put it in a film festival. So it's, okay, so is that the kind of visibility you want? So that means that you cannot put it in the internet because a film festival asks you to put it first in the festival and later on the web. So it's, do you want to go that way? Do you want to go into the circuit of showing your story through a specialized public in a very specific circuit, maybe winning a prize, but then there are legal components of that, and there are restrictions in terms of to whom you can show that. So usually what happens is, yeah, we don't need it, right? And I say, whatever you want. We have experiences, and you speak about those experiences of people that decided to go through the film festivals. And on the other way, it's your legacy. Those videos are for you. So you think you can spread it, make copies, give it to people in the United States. Some of them posted the videos to family here so they could see what was happening in their neighborhood. It's a way of getting in touch rather than having this like utilitarian approach in terms of making them visible. Some of them need it because it's a political aspect. Some of them need it because they are like visible for the society. But in a sense, it's more than which kind of approach of communication they want to do. And usually what they want is to start making their stories, and after 3 or 4 years, they start calling the radio stations, going to the TV channels. They start to be active in terms of content production that I think is better, and in the long term, rather than just jumping in and being visible for the people. So that's like my general experience in terms of what I've done with the methodology. And people are not looking for having an impact very fast. So maybe there are ways of making a communication campaign better, but nowadays what I've seen is more like in the way of sharing and building abilities to build the stories and make a contribution for the community, I would say.
This is sort of a question that piggybacks off that, and yours is, a lot of what I was thinking about watching the presentation was the relationship between the aesthetics of form and the politics of visibility. Documentary's history has been from the beginning connected to power forces to get a message across to either preserve or change people, you know. And we went through this in class, this whole discussion. And there was a whole discussion about Michael Moore. And it was a whole, you know, because in a sense, as Michael Moore becomes a big phenomenon, in a sense, is that he becomes the first one who really shows the documentary could be profitable because he gets it distributed. But it's at the same time, he keeps on coming up and studying the issues. Like his latest one on Trump land. So ironic that he predicts Trump because he goes out and studies Trump Nation. He predicts Trump's going to win the election. So, what is the role of the documentarian in relationship to the part, for instance, Greenwald's whole method is basically, no, I want it in the film festivals. I want it out there. I want to partner with 100 people to make an army, 100 institutions to put Walmart in check, to fight the that war. He believes the documentary has that power. With this democratization of documentary, that becomes a weakening too at the same time. So I look at your project at the end, and I say, that would be a lot easier to enact in the United States because the gangs don't have the power that they have in Mexico. So what happens in Mexico with that? Can you actually get these social organizations to come on board?
Actually, the march they are having is all the nonprofits, foundations, and groups related to disappeared people. They're going to make a march in Mexico City, and the idea is they are building. The thing is that they are not building agency through documentary. That's one of the things that is different from the communities in the United States. What they decided finally was first that they needed a shared database of DNA samples. And what they are working for first is they are making visible the diversity of people coming together in Mexico City. They are going to do a very radical approach. They made all the textiles they're going to use are the same size. And there's going to be just one face in every textile, and they're going to put it one after the other one. The whole community. So they are expecting to have a 6-hour march coming one after the other to show the people through the public media the magnitude of the problem of the disappeared people in Mexico. So they are a little bit like playing with the regular media, and they're trying to make these approaches of having a little bit like an identity in terms of collective, to have 2 or 3 products that eloquently try to explain what they're doing and how much people is related to it. But they're not going forward in terms of trying to build communities and networks of grassroots, because what has happened, at least with the people disappearing and the collectives related to it, is that once they come together, problems start to rise. Some of them want to go and get funding. Some of them want to go with the NGOs. And there are NGOs that are like vultures looking for them because that way they can have public funding. And then there are independents that are trying to stay away from that and looking for ways of making pressure. These women actually got the people from United Nations related to human rights to go 3 times to Guadalajara by now to dialogue with the government. So that's why they gave them the files. So they're making a lot of intervention in terms of going, they are making a little bit like in Argentina with Abuelas de Mayo. They are going every first Tuesday of the month to stay in front of the government palace to put the textiles and the number and the names, and they are asking the people to make a little cord with the name of one of the disappeared people and put it in the kiosk. So they are putting all these cords around the kiosk every single month, and they keep them. So by now they have like a huge mountain of cords with the name of the disappeared people. So they are making more like performance rather than documentary, and they are not trying to approach to make collective in terms of what Greenwald was doing, that it's bringing different grassroots to work together to make the projects happen. Every single time they try to get together, there are 2, 3, or 4 that they are trying to grasp all the money or all the attention, and they're not having enough representation in terms of what they need. We had a march exactly the week we were filming this, and it was for the anniversary of Ayotzinapa, and it was the first time the people from Ayotzinapa had a gesture with the disappeared people in Jalisco. And they said at the beginning of the march that they would be at the beginning of the march, in front of the march, directing everything. And then people from Oaxaca came, and they sent the mothers to the middle of the convoy. So this kind of things happens all the time. Everybody's trying to be more visible, trying to be in front of it, to be the leader. We have like this awful notion that we need to be part of the first row to be part of it, and if you're in back helping, you're nobody. So this kind of mentality works as a counterpart for this kind of approaches that could be building a stronger network. And in terms of diluting, it's happening. This kind of products are becoming like local ways of engaging with the problem, but not actually having agency at all. It's a little bit like Divergent in those terms.
Greenwald's model is a little different because he keeps the filmmakers separate. And then the product, the artifact, goes out to the groups, and they use it the way they want it, and the thread is the issue. And basically, that's how he raises hundreds of thousands of people interested and sells hundreds of thousands.
And the other thing is that documentaries in Mexico right now with the boom of documentary, they are looking for their new film rather than working with an institution or with a collective to keep track of it. So they're looking for the next movie in the film festival rather than making a commitment with. So you can see somebody, maybe a very well-known documentary making a film about the polluted river in which we were at, and then he moves to the indigenous people in Oaxaca and then goes to the border. So they have like this, more like their career and a little bit of their ego in terms of filmmaking, rather than committing with the cause and trying to build this kind of things. That part of the media industry in Mexico is almost inexistent. The people that are working for nonprofits making this kind of products is really, really young, unfortunately. We have
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me this comment is thinking about audience, right? And who we are intended for. So I can imagine, for example, Oaxaca, the groups I work with, some of that is for them, right? So if they are documenting, so Oaxaca, they want to know what's going on in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, some of the kids are reconnected with their roots, right? So the audience is for that community, right? Or like that's the intent to educate the community. And then something like this, I'm wondering about like the project. So when we're thinking about impact, right? We have to like think about like that is the audience intended also, right? But in this case, like the disappeared, it reminds me of, or at least that's an outward audience. It's a bigger audience. It's like the feminicides, so many see this in Juarez, right? Or the disappeared in the desert, right? So you're trying to call a much broader, right, attention to those because these are like these big human rights issues, right? So that these things are also, that's part of of these flows of information as well, right? And it's giving shape to what happens, but you can't think about impact or effect without thinking about intentionality or intent and audience.
To give you just a glimpse, with these moms, they made a very well-known documentary made a film. And it had some screenings in the festivals in Mexico, and then out of the blue, Sheffield Documentary Film Festival put it in the screenings, and it became global. Actually, she was nominated to the Mexican Oscars that are called Arieles. She was a journalist in Guadalajara. And by the moment she was called for the Arieles, she didn't invite the mothers to the red carpet, and somebody from the Arieles called them to invite them. And by the moment this filmmaker got to the room, she saw her characters from the documentary sitting there, paid by the institution instead of being invited by them. So this kind of things happens day on and day off. So it's very hard and it's very complicated to try to build. And at the moment you have some impact, crows and vultures come to see what's happening there. So this kind of approach that it's starting low with 2 or 3 stories from the communities, helping them to tell their narratives, to find what they want to say. It's a way of making some agency without exposing them directly to the vultures in the first time. So it's a way of negotiating a little bit, not becoming very visible, to avoid the attacks, in one sense, but at the same time trying to build some community values and some stories that are worth sharing, I would say.
I guess this works well with what is this comment or question? You know, comment, I guess. She was thinking about audience and so much of this collaborative endeavors. The workshop seemed great. I was just wondering in terms of aesthetics, right? I mean, you know a lot about documentary history and film form and how to create narrative structure, identification, and so that I didn't hear the voiceover, but with the disappeared women, it started with, or children, it started with a series of individual children, the photograph being held by a family member, and then it became, a shot, track back of all, and then it became statistics, and so it was effective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there is a tension between making one's own story and then collaborating with someone who is it difficult to kind of pull away and not?
It is.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It would be better if you, and so, this is the tension between oral history versus an anthropology, participant, observer.
It's an anthropological prejudice theory. Anthropologists usually speak about non-participant observation. I don't know what that is. I haven't seen it happening. Maybe one day I'm going to have an epiphany. But what Zavala says, and I think it makes a lot of sense to me, is I feel impelled to tell you if your shot has a crooked horizon, or if you have overexposed the material because you're not going to have a clean image. In the same sense that he says all the way around, if you're teaching me how to grow a tomato plant and it's going aside and it's not going to grow properly, you tell me, you know what, you can put a stick, put a little cord so it will grow up. So if they have this natural way of approaching to teach us what they know, why do we have this overthinking approach that they're going to feel uncomfortable if you tell them, you know what, this shot is not useful for the project because you made an overexposure. That's what you know how to do, and you're helping them. If they still want to make the overexposure and use it, you can negotiate that part. And in terms of what it means for them, you can try to make sense of it. And if it has a place in the narrative, that's okay, even though if it's badly made. But the thing is, there's a dialogue between the people that are interfering or intervening in the project, and that means that you're actually building a relationship. So yeah, aesthetics is a part, but if you try to flow with it as part of the experience, I think you're fine in terms of sharing the things you know. If you know about aesthetics or about documentary history, you say, you know what, this shot I'm going to show you later on YouTube when we get home, the film I'm thinking about, to see the comparison. The thing that is really important, rather than what you know, is how they see you. So for example, when I'm working with them, I never conduct the the workshops, because every single time they approach me and say, Professor, no, I'm Diego. So usually what I do is that I put one of the students to coordinate the workshop. So in that sense, I become an advisor, and people can come to me, and I have more experience than them. But actually what I want is my students to relate to the people, and then if they need me, I can go with different teams. If I go there, it becomes a way of imposing a little bit with this figure of the professor coming from the university that I don't need at all. So I try to be very conscious about how I dress, how I speak, how much time I take to speak about the project. So trying to give the students the opportunity to be the ones that are actually putting things in the role. If I go and say, no, you know what, we need to speak more about documentary history, it just goes to the trash. So it's more in terms of the consciousness of how you intervene in the community in the first moment of rapport, rather than in the moment when you are already making the things. They get excited as you, and they say, oh, it's true, if you put it this way, it looks better, or if you put it this way. So you start playing with them, rather than teaching them strictly how to make things, because there is a need behind the way you're approaching it. So it's a way of dialoguing rather than making this approach. Anthropologists hate this kind of methodology because they say it's impure and it's not working and it's not science and things like that. But I don't care.
Not objective.
So as an anthropologist, I disagree with you.
I apologize. Sorry.
So my question is actually about politics. So how do you, so let's say you work in a community. I can see like how there's this whole Centro para el Rescate de la Lengua y Zapoteca, it's a whole revitalization program, right? And so they're really interested in having people come. And so you go to that group and you know, the fact that Nini went to there and team members of the community went, but those members didn't empower everybody else to learn how to take videos, right? I mean, and there was no real aesthetic value there anyways. But you go to this place and you empower a certain group of people to do that, but at the same time, that creates tensions within communities,
Lots
right?
of tensions.
So what are the kinds of politics, and how do you negotiate with that?
For example, when we were making an intervention in Santa Cecilia, that's a neighborhood where there's 5,000 gang members operating the streets in that neighborhood. They have a huge cultural center that operates beautifully. They have 2 big bands, they've got a radio station, they give ballet classes. So even though if there's the police persecuting or even shooting people out on the streets, you see the kids with the trombones and the saxophone. It's a very weird space. The guy that was hired to run the radio station, and they had this cabinet for making audio, was charging the hip hop bands 50 pesos every single time they used it. But it was built by the government and it was for the community use. So this empowerment of the person that is in charge of having a key and putting on the console, it's building politics. That's the thing. So it's going over and over and over every single time. So you need to, what we did one day, we were working and the kids began to make this, well, but we can't use the audio station. And so they said, why not? Well, because blah, 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 blah. And we said, what's the matter? So what we did is we broke a window at night and we went in and we did the audio and we waited for one to come in the morning and see us working. And since we were part of the 3 universities and there was an NGO working and there was a government presence, we said, you know what? You're going to be fired if you do this once again. So yeah, but the other thing is to tell the kids that that's yours, so you can use it. But he is there to organize, so it's negotiating all the time with the people. And that's why it's important also not to lose the contact with people, to see if they need more things, or if you need more things, or if you want to share something else, or if you want to make another experience, or if they want to make more videos. It's a way of organic approach to try to improve instead of letting abandonment and things like this will happen. It's natural. especially in Mexico, I would say, from parts of the ethnic.
I think we've come to the point where we encourage shooting as gangs and filming. Thank you.